The moment Marcus Vane laughed in my courtroom, I knew he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. If this is your first time here, welcome to this channel where we explore powerful courtroom stories that remind us why justice still matters. Go ahead and follow along so you never miss a case. I want to be clear before we begin. This is a dramatized story inspired by real courtroom lessons about accountability and the law. The names, characters, locations, and situations in this story are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real individuals or real events is coincidental. The purpose of this legal story is to explore the principles of fairness, responsibility, and compassion that shape how justice is served every day in courtrooms across this country. Now, let me tell you about Marcus Vane. But before I do, I want to share something with you. Something I still think about from earlier in my years on the bench. A man came before me, a young contractor who had made a serious mistake on a job site that injured a coworker. He could have hidden behind lawyers and excuses. Instead, when I looked at him and asked if he had anything to say before I ruled, he stood up and said simply, "I should have been more careful. I'm sorry." Those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about who he was. I still gave him consequences because accountability matters, but I also gave him a path forward. The law is not only about punishment. It is about responsibility and, when it is earned, about compassion. I carried that memory with me into the day Marcus Vane walked into Bridgecroft County Courtroom. He walked in the way some wealthy people do, like the room had been built specifically to hold them. Marcus Vane was 53 years old, the founder and CEO of Vane Capital Development, a real estate company worth an estimated $4 billion. He wore a suit that probably cost more than what most people in that gallery earned in a month. His legal team was 5 attorneys deep, led by a sharp defense lawyer named Daniel Reeves, who had a reputation for making cases disappear long before they reached a verdict. The case against Vane had been filed by a woman named Clara Mendez. Clara was 71 years old. She had lived for 22 years in the Harlow Gardens apartment complex on the edge of Riverton City, a modest but well-kept community of 112 low-income families. She was a retired school aide. She had her late husband's photographs on those walls, her children's drawings in frames. A life lived carefully and with love in those rooms. Vane Capital had purchased the Harlow Gardens property 18 months earlier with plans to demolish it and build a luxury high-rise. Under the law, residents were required to receive a formal written notice at least 90 days before any demolition could begin. They were entitled to that time to find new housing. That 90-day window was not a courtesy. It was the law. Vane Capital sent notices, but the demolition began 61 days early. If you've ever wondered how money and power can make someone forget that other people exist, this case will show you exactly how that happens. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Clara Mendez had been inside her apartment when the machinery arrived. She heard the sound of the building next to hers begin to come down. She had 20 minutes to grab what she could before workers told her she had to leave. 20 minutes. After 22 years, she lost furniture, documents, medications, photographs, and the hand-stitched quilt her mother had made for her wedding day. She lost all of it because Marcus Vane had decided that the legal waiting period was an inconvenience. The other residents of Harlow Gardens scattered. Some went to shelters, some to family, some had nowhere to go at all. Clara ended up in her granddaughter's small apartment, sleeping on a couch, taking her blood pressure medication on a folding table in the kitchen. The case came to me as a civil action for wrongful displacement and property loss, but the evidence that had been gathered by plaintiff's attorney Jordan Hayes pointed to something far more serious. When I reviewed the filings in my chambers, I could already see the outline of a story that went much deeper than a missed deadline. That first morning, as we called the courtroom to order, I looked over at Marcus Vane. He was leaning back slightly in his chair, speaking quietly to Daniel Reeves, and he smiled at something his attorney said. Not a polite smile, a comfortable, dismissive smile. The kind of smile that says this is not a problem. This is just a process. I have seen that smile before. It never ends the way the person wearing it expects. Jordan Hayes presented his opening clearly and carefully. He described the timeline. He described what the law required. He described what Vane Capital did instead. He showed photographs of the demolition already underway while families were still inside the building. He showed hospital records of a resident who suffered a stress-related cardiac episode during the chaos of that morning. He called it what it was, a reckless disregard for human beings. Daniel Reeves responded with confidence. He argued that the notice process had been followed properly. He presented paperwork. He pointed to signed documentation showing that residents, including Clara Mendez, had been informed and had acknowledged the timeline. He spoke about zoning approvals and city permits. He said his client had done everything by the book. That was the first claim I kept in mind. Stay with me through the rest of this case, because what comes next changes everything, and I promise the final verdict is worth waiting for. The first key witness was a Vane Capital project supervisor named Roy Callahan. He testified that the demolition schedule had been moved up due to weather projections and financing deadlines. He was calm and organized. He supported the defense's narrative almost perfectly. Almost. When Jordan Hayes cross-examined him, he asked one specific question. He asked Callahan who had personally authorized moving the start date forward. Callahan paused. He looked briefly toward the defense table. Then he said the authorization had come from the top, from Mr. Vane himself. In writing. Hayes then submitted the internal email. In plain language, Marcus Vane had written to his project team, move the start date. I'm not losing the financing window over a bunch of tenants who haven't left yet. Handle it. The courtroom went completely silent. I did not need to call for order. Every person in that room, including Marcus Vane's own legal team, sat absolutely still. The only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system above us. Vane shifted in his seat. For the first time that morning, the smile was gone. That email alone established intent. It established that Vane knew. It established that the decision to displace those families early was not a clerical error. It was a choice. A deliberate one made by a man who believed his financial interests outweighed the legal rights of 112 families. But Jordan Hayes was not finished. He asked the court to admit a second set of documents. These documents had taken his team months to uncover through a formal discovery request. They showed that Vane Capital had faced a nearly identical situation 4 years earlier in the city of Delport. A separate affordable housing complex, a similar accelerated demolition, a similar wave of displaced residents. That case had been settled quietly out of court. The terms were sealed. The families received small payments. And Vane Capital had never publicly acknowledged any wrongdoing. This was not a mistake. This was a pattern. If this story is opening your eyes to how accountability works in a courtroom, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Now here is where the legal story took its most important turn. I want you to understand what happened next because it changed the entire weight of what I was looking at. The defense had submitted documentation showing that Clara Mendez, like other residents, had signed a voluntary early vacate agreement. Daniel Reeves had referenced this document in his opening. He had presented it as proof that residents were cooperative and properly handled. Clara's signature was on that form. The date on the form was 3 weeks before the demolition. The problem was that Clara Mendez testified, under oath and with clear composure, that she had never signed any such document. She said she had never seen it before it appeared in court filings. She said the signature was not hers. Jordan Hayes requested a forensic comparison. I granted it. The forensic handwriting analysis came back before the end of the week. The signature on the early vacate agreement did not match the verified signature samples from Clara's lease, her bank documents, or her original move-in paperwork. The analysis was unambiguous. Clara Mendez's signature had been forged. The second silence that fell over that courtroom was different from the first. The first silence was shock. This one was something heavier. It was the silence of a room full of people realizing they were looking at something much worse than carelessness. Someone inside Vane Capital had not just ignored the law. They had manufactured a false document and placed it in legal proceedings as though it were real. I looked at Marcus Vane. He was pale. His expression had changed entirely. Whatever confidence had walked through my courtroom door that first morning was gone. He was whispering urgently to Daniel Reeves, who had gone very still and was staring at the table. I called a short recess. When we returned, Daniel Reeves asked to approach the bench. He told me, quietly and with visible discomfort, that his client wished to address the court. I allowed it with conditions. Marcus Fain stood up. He did not look the same as he had at the start of this trial. He said he had not personally ordered any document to be altered. He said he had trusted his operations team to manage resident relations. He said he had not known the extent of what had been done. I listened to every word. I considered every word. And then I asked him directly, did he issue the email telling his team to move the start date forward regardless of the residents who had not yet left? He said yes. I asked him if he had reviewed the resident agreements before submitting them to this court as evidence. He said he had not. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, Mr. Vane, the law does not reward people for the harm they did not personally commit when they created the conditions that made that harm possible. I will explain my verdict now, and I want to make sure you understand my reasoning, because every part of it matters. The law in this case was clear. Vane Capital had violated the mandatory 90-day notice requirement. That violation was not in dispute. It had been authorized from the top. The email proved it. On that count alone, there was financial liability to every displaced resident, including Clara Mendez. The law requires that when you take something from someone that they were entitled to keep, you owe them for it. Period. Accountability meant more than money. Marcus Vane had spent years operating with the belief that legal inconveniences could be absorbed, settled quietly, and moved past without real consequence. The Delport case showed that. The forged document showed that someone in his organization had learned to operate in the same way. A culture starts at the top. When a leader signals that deadlines and rights are obstacles rather than rules, the people under that leader act accordingly. Vane did not forge Clara's signature, but he had built an environment where someone felt safe doing exactly that. That weight belonged to him. Compassion also had a place in my ruling. Not compassion for Marcus Vane's fortune, but compassion for every person in that situation. For Clara, who had lost irreplaceable parts of her life. For the residents who scattered and struggled. For the family of the man who suffered a cardiac event that morning. Compassion demanded that this verdict make those people as whole as they could possibly be made. And the protection of the community required that this verdict send a clear message. Wealth is not a pass. A corporation is not above the law. Displacing vulnerable people for profit without following the legal process will not be treated as a simple fine to be written off. It will be treated as the serious harm it is. I ordered Vane Capital to pay full compensatory damages to every displaced resident of Harlow Gardens, calculated based on documented losses, relocation costs, and emotional distress. I ordered the company to fund the full construction cost of a replacement affordable housing development of equal or greater size within Riverton City, with a 10-year affordability guarantee. I referred the forged document to the state attorney's office for criminal investigation of fraud upon the court. And I ordered Marcus Vane personally to complete 200 hours of community service within a social services organization serving housing insecure families, not as a symbolic gesture, but because I believed he needed to look at the people his decisions affected, not as numbers on a spreadsheet, as human beings. The courtroom was quiet when I finished reading the verdict. Not the silence of shock this time. It was something closer to the sound of a long breath finally let out. Clara Mendez sat very still. Her attorney, Jordan Hayes, placed his hand gently on the table near her as if to say, "It's done." She did not celebrate. She did not shout. She simply closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, and she nodded slowly, the way people do when something they waited a long time for finally arrives. Marcus Vane stood at his table with his hands folded in front of him. He did not look angry. He looked tired. And maybe, I thought, just maybe, something in that room had reached him. Something he had not been able to hear from behind the glass wall of his wealth and certainty. I genuinely hope it did. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because a person who truly understands the harm they caused is less likely to cause it again. Before you leave today, let me ask you this. What did this case make you think about, and who in your life might need to hear a story like this one? I have thought about this case many times since that day. Not because it was the most complicated case I have ever handled, but because of what it came down to at its core. A man with enormous resources had decided, somewhere along the way, that the rules were for other people, that the law was something you managed, not something you followed, that the people affected by his decisions were inconveniences, not human beings with rights and histories and lives. And the one thing he forgot, the thing that ultimately dismantled everything his legal team had built, was something so simple it should not have needed a courtroom to teach it. He forgot that the people on the other side of his decisions were real. Clara Mendez was real. Her late husband's photographs were real. Her 22 years in that home were real. Her signature was real. And when he allowed someone in his organization to replace what was real with what was convenient, the law found it. The law always finds it eventually. That is what I want you to carry with you from this legal story. Accountability is not revenge. It is the mechanism that keeps powerful people and ordinary people on the same level ground. Without it, the strong will always take from the weak and simply write a check if they get caught. With it, even the most confident man in the most expensive suit has to stand before the same rules as everyone else. That is what justice served means to me. Not humiliation, not cruelty, equality before the law. And compassion, real compassion, is not weakness. It is the part of justice that remembers that we are dealing with human lives. Clara Mendez deserved to grow old in her home. Those families deserved their 90 days. A signature on a document deserved to actually belong to the person whose name it bore. Compassion is the reason the law gives people rights in the first place. I am still a judge because I believe those two things, accountability and compassion, are not opposites. They belong together. Every courtroom drama worth telling reminds us of that truth. The law at its best does not just punish. It restores. It protects. It reminds us that how we treat the most vulnerable among us is the truest measure of who we are as a society. Marcus Vane forgot that. For a time, the people in his organization forgot it. But in Bridgecroft County courtroom on that day, the law remembered it for them. And I hope this story has helped you remember it too. If this case moved you, if it made you think about fairness and what it really means to be accountable, this channel has more stories just like this one waiting for you, and every one of them is worth your time. Until next time, this is your narrator reminding you, no one is above the law, and no one, no matter how much they have, is more important than the people they have the power to harm. Stay thoughtful, stay fair, and remember that justice, when it is truly served, belongs to all of us.